Renee, can you explain what is ARPA-H and how does it fit within the healthcare infrastructure?
Yeah, so this is really the president's vision. So in March of 2022, President Biden called on the Congress to fund an agency that we can put inside Health and Human Services that's built after that audacious DARPA model, where we can take on that high risk, high payoff research that the commercial sector can't take on, that the rest of the funding ecosystem can't take on, but really have a place to do that for health. The president, when he was vice president, launched, of course, Cancer Moonshot. And so this is really an agency to create those next moonshots going forward. And we're doing so. I started 7 months ago. And in that time, we're building kind of the biz ops side of the house that we can get things running to move very quickly. And now bringing on that technical team to address, like, what are those problems that we're going to address in our first years at ARPA-H.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the approach, which is a little bit different? You've got this program manager model at ARPA-H, and tell us a little bit about how that's going to work and how it's starting off in these first few months.
Yeah, so one of the really unique things about the ARPA-H business model is that I won't set a technical agenda that's top down. We really look for program managers who want to come on board for a term appointment. The Congress has set this as 3 years to start. And we hire those PMs because they're demonstrated doers, they have expertise in a given field, and they've identified the problem that they want to solve. So we hire them to solve that problem. And so this year I hope to hire 20 program managers across 20 totally different projects to create a portfolio of programs that we will fund and accelerate moving forward. And it's really those program managers that we empower to be decision makers on their programs. They'll announce to the world, this is my idea that I'm looking for solvers for, and they bring together teams of what we call performers. This could be industry, this could be academia, to try to get to those solutions with those program managers. And it's a really unique model. It creates a flywheel. They're here for 3 years, so every 2 weeks, 1% of their time is gone. So there's an urgency to solve those problems, and I'll ask them to launch one program a year at a minimum. And then their terms will be up. They'll have to leave the agency, and then new program managers and new PMs ideas will be seeded.
Is there an opportunity to extend those? If there's something that looks like, gee, it just didn't work out for 3 years, but we need another year, we need another 2 years. How does that process work?
Yeah, so it could be staggered in terms of the length of a program. So most programs will be 2 to 5 years in length. So a program manager may launch a program, but they might not be the program manager that brings it to the clinic. And so that's one of the interesting parts of what we do. So for example, when I was a DARPA program manager and I inherited a program that had just launched from a program manager and then was the one that managed it for the next 5 years. So there's a lot of different ways that we kind of introduce that energy into those projects. But for the program itself, it really is a transaction at ARPA-H. Our ecosystem is the federal funding ecosystem. We're here to augment what NIH can do, what HHS can do, but also what the private sector can do. It can be, on the back of a napkin, your idea. We don't need proof of concept, and we'll kind of take on that challenge so that it's possible. And success for us is when it leaves the agency. It really has to graduate.
What are some of the topics that you think the group is most interested in? And then how, if there is an interested researcher or investor, how do they get involved and, in a sense, apply to be a part of a program?
Yeah, so the application process is pretty simple. It's not your typical government USA jobs process. We have a form fill on our website. That process is, submit your CB, but also we ask that PM candidates answer what we call the Heilmeyer questions. So George Heilmeyer was an early director at DARPA and laid out 8 questions to describe a problem. What's the problem you're trying to solve? How's it done today? What's new in your approach? And then kind of milestones, metrics, and timing. What we've added for ARPA-H that's really unique are 2 additional questions. One that addresses accessibility, cost, and user experience. We want people to enthusiastically adopt capabilities that we make at ARPA-H and not have them sit on the shelf. We are very aware that the gap between innovation and having things work in the real world is tremendous, and we need to bridge that gap. The other question we ask is around messaging. So, how might there be misinformation around this concept? This is a lesson learned when I was at DARPA. I was there when Moderna was funded, when there's 4 people to gene and code antibodies and antigens. And looking back a decade ago, I wish we had started a program on messaging around that program as well, to build trust, et cetera, with communities. We have 1 program. So you asked about the types of programs that we're going to launch. We have 5 PMs on board. So there's 4 program managers that are incubating their concepts. But the one that's launched, I think it really captures the spirit of what an ARPA program will be. That program's called Nitro. It's Novel Innovations for Tissue Regeneration in Osteoarthritis. The simple way to talk about that is, what if your joints could heal themselves? So instead of having multiple operations through your lifetime as you age or have some other trauma, kind of needle-based approaches to regrow bone and cartilage at your joints. And in extreme cases where you might need an implant instead of a titanium implant, let's say, have a lab-grown implant. That program manager, who's a surgeon, that decided to come to ARPA-H to solve this problem because he faced this in the clinic. And he did the math and said, he's a young man, I can do this the rest of my career in the operating room and impact maybe about 40,000 patients in a great career. I can come to ARPA-H and I can do that for 100 million patients. And so I like that math, and I'm going to come in and unstick this for my field. So actually, I think tomorrow is a proposer's day for Nitro. So it's an open solicitation now. But that's the flavor of the types of things like the javelins into the future that we want to throw and see if we can be successful.
Great. And particularly with a new agency like this, it really is kind of up to you to help craft the vision for the future. And how do you think about the vision for ARPA-H in the next 5 or 10 years? And what are you thinking about to shape the whole organization? And beyond that, what are you thinking about for how fast you can ramp up the organization? Because obviously you just said you got 1 project now,
yeah.
But what are your targets for how many you want to get to by the end of this year, by the end of 2 years, 5 years, et cetera?
So our initial appropriation that we have from the Congress is $2.5 billion. So it's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. So we know that the first 20 program managers we have, let's say if each program is $100 million, we want to really see a diversity in those 20 projects. But I'm agnostic, honestly. We can have surgery programs. We can have cellular manufacturing programs. We're open to all. What we've done is we've identified 4 focus areas that are, I'd say, very high level, but just to give the spirit of the types of projects. So health science futures is when somebody asks me what disease does ARPA-H focus on, I say we actually look at health science futures, which is tools, technologies, and platforms. So what's the next molecular capability that might be able to help cancer or Alzheimer's disease? Scalable solutions, so think about all the delivery challenges that we meet to get to that last mile to patients and meet Americans at scale. Our customer base is all Americans. Proactive health, keeping people from becoming patients in the first place. And then finally, resilient systems. So what are we doubling down in funding now in between the next pandemic crisis or a climate crisis that we know we're going to be ready then for the next threat that is impacted?
Just to follow up on that just a little bit, do you have any metrics that you guys are looking at as far as what will make you successful if we look out 5 years from now and say, all right, here's what made us successful?
So a few things. Our mission is to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. And so each program has to define what is the health outcome that they're trying to pursue. And that's defined by the program manager. Within those broad agency announcements, in the case of, I'll just use Ross's program, Nitro, there's metrics in terms of performance and growth of those cells, but there's also metrics on enrollment and clinical trial. So if you look, you'll see that he has to enroll a diverse population that represents the diversity of the population that is actually afflicted with osteoarthritis to make sure that we really are helping the broadest community. So those are examples of the types of metrics. But it's something that's really front of mind for me because 4.5 years from now, I have to go back to the Congress and they're going to ask me, okay, what have you done? What outcomes have you impacted? Which is actually pretty challenging because ARPA timelines tend to be 10 or 15 years. So, we want to accelerate cures, but I might not have a cure by then. And so that's part of my job is like managing those expectations. That what are those incremental progress, not incremental, but the milestones along the way that let you know you're on track for that radical change.
And bring that up one level. When you present this, and I've heard you present this, you talk about a lot of stakeholders that are involved, kind of the input stakeholders and the outcome stakeholders. I'm just wondering if you could bring that up a level and tell us about all the stakeholders involved, especially as you talk about reporting back to Congress what the advances are.
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits to working with ARPA-H, especially if you're from the private sector, is everybody that we can convene and bring to the table. So I'll just use Nitro as another example. Before Ross even launched his program, stakeholders like FDA were at the table to discuss the animal models and the requirements that are going to need to go forward. So they're already on board before we've launched the program. Conversations with CMS, make sure that we can be thinking about reimbursement before we're even on the last day of the program. NIH is an important player as well, so we want to hear their subject matter expertise. They won't be a decision maker on the program, but there's a lot of great fundamental science there that may be able to apply. And so it's a really, I think, a superpower of ARPA-H to bring those folks together. We have an additional authority where we can directly reimburse FDA. This is unique for ARPA-H, and we recently put a call out to industry saying, what would you like to see us help incentivize in collaboration with the Commissioner's Office that would get you wanting to work with ARPA-H? We know there's financial incentives, but what about if you share your data pre-competitively and we can get an accelerated approval timeline? Is that interesting for industry? And so we're going to experiment a little bit with some of those incentives, and always open to hearing those ideas of what the sticking points are in the community. We hear a lot about platform technologies in this context too.
So speaking of the FDA, and you mentioned the NIH or other government agencies, in your words, can you define what ARPA-H is versus the NIH and the FDA?
Yes.
And in an ideal circumstance, how will they all kind of fit together? And maybe what are you worried about, and what pitfalls do you want to try to avoid so that there's not stepping on toes across those three agencies?
So FDA obviously are the regulators. They regulate products, not technologies. But what I've learned over time, having been a DARPA program manager, is they want an early view into what you're developing, because especially from an ARPA, oftentimes you're creating a technology they've never seen before, and their reviewers might not be ready for it. And so having those conversations early on so that they're aware of what's being developed and they're a partner along the way, so that when the product is ready to be reviewed, it's not a surprise, and we've already had those conversations. That's super helpful. And so part of what I see my job, and FDA challenges me in this way, we talk about platform technologies. The more and more that we are all excited about platform technologies, the less that we want to start from scratch with every new approval. And so what can we do to allow for some of that reusability of biology, to be reusability of the regulatory process? And what have we learned that we can be comfortable moving forward with safely? And so that's another part that we want to really push on the FDA, more and more examples of modularity that they need to consider. For NIH, it's a very unique structure. We're the only organization that is stood up within NIH, but we have a separate budget, and I actually report to Secretary Becerra. So that means I have a separate agenda. I'm not beholden to the requirements of NIH, and in fact, we are technically exempt from NIH policy. In the absence of an ARPA-H policy, we take on NIH policy, but where it makes sense for us to write our own policy, we can do so. One really concrete example of that is study sections. So we don't have study sections. At ARPA-H, the program manager is the sole decision maker.
But just to follow up on that, so to the project manager, or to a group or a person that has an idea that they think fits in ARPA-H, how would they think about it versus getting an NIH grant? Like in the mind of the person that wants to contact you, what distinguishes it to say, this, I should go to ARPA-H, I shouldn't necessarily go to NIH?
So a couple of differences in our funding. So that wouldn't even be a question, because it'd be so high risk that NIH wouldn't take it on. So that's A. And then B is, we don't issue grants at ARPA-H. We issue contracts, cooperative agreements, and other transactions. And so that should kind of mean two things to you. One is we have a seat at the table in that decision making. We want to help you be successful and get across the finish line, but it's not handing over the check and walking away. We are really a part of that process. In the example of the Nitro program, our goal is to get to the clinic for bone and joint regeneration, and that's what we're going to stay focused on all the way to the end of that program. So the program manager is a very active part of helping you solve some of those problems. They tend to be really well-resourced projects as well. So we want to make sure that we can buy down execution risk. We want to make sure you have the team at hand that you need to get the job done, that you have the equipment, so that you can just focus on that technical risk. And so that it's a give and take, right? You get a lot of resources, but there's very active program management from our side.
Can you talk a little bit about your thought process as you came on to this new organization? You had background at DARPA, background in private industry, and what was your thought process about taking on this brand new opportunity?
So when I left DARPA, I joined as a program manager to solve a big problem, and the opportunity to be able to do that with the at a funding agency with multi-million-dollar budgets was really exciting for me to move the state of the art. And I didn't see any other place in government doing that. So when I left DARPA, I'm kind of eating crow now because I told everybody I know, I'm like, I'm never going back to government because I just left the best possible job in government. It was a dream. And really, I think, set me up for the next steps in my career. And then, there started to be little rumblings about an ARPA for health. And those of us, that are kind of in the domain were really excited about it because, the big D in front of DARPA, everything that we did in the biotech domain was defense related. And so, a number of times I had to turn down proposals that were amazing, but they just weren't in scope for DARPA. So I knew the energy was out there from the community. And so when I actually started to advise the White House a little bit in their process for standing up in ARPA, and so I had I wasn't even thinking about going, but then the people in the room, fewer and fewer, and my opinions were getting stronger and stronger, and I really laid out, I think, a clear vision for the things that ARPA-H had to be uncompromising on in order to be successful, being able to report to Secretary Becerra, having a separate budget, also ensuring that our program managers could be autonomous, and that we had enough funds to really kick off the agency. And then, so eventually when I got the phone call, it was an automatic yes, and just really, really excited to have this opportunity.
I'd be interested to hear, going back, you talk about the osteoarthritis program, but what do you think are other concepts or ideas, just to give the audience and others listening and maybe people that are interested in getting involved, a little bit more about the specific scope and what would appropriate projects be? So I don't want to put you on the spot, and I know you're having a day coming up soon, but just would love to know maybe some of the other areas, nutrition, sleep, or other kind of platforms maybe that you think would be really appropriate for ARPA-H versus NIH or other funding.
Yeah, so again, we look to our program managers for those ideas, but a few areas we've been exploring, actually a lot of conversations today around cell and gene therapies, and those conversations start with someone saying, well, ARPA-H shouldn't fund that because it's already so well funded elsewhere, but where it's not funded well is people addressing cost and accessibility and some of the delivery challenges, and so I think that's a real big white space for ARPA-H. I'm a big believer in actually, synthetic biology community actually having a responsibility to drive the cost down in a lot of cases. And get to scale. So that's just one example. There's a lot of interesting convergences of technologies now too. So ARPA-H can be a place to even try things again that we weren't able to accomplish. One example is at DARPA, there was a lot of remote surgery that was done to support warfighters abroad, having surgeons in the United States, for example, support surgeries in the Middle East. The problem there is data latency. We have 5G now. Is that another problem that now we're able to address because we have some of these new capabilities? So it's those intersections of different disciplines that actually are where there's some really surprising solutions that I'd love for us to be able to pursue as we go forward.
Great. Another kind of more topical question is kind of the competition of dollars. So we've just went through this debt ceiling debate, and obviously the upcoming appropriations battle over who gets how much. How are you thinking about, all right, this is what I need or what we need to kind of go out there and do what ARPA-H needs to do versus, some on Capitol Hill might say, yeah, maybe you don't need quite that much money here, but we're going to put it over here at NIH or over here at wherever, CDC or wherever it might be.
Yeah. So that's definitely a big part of my job, making sure that our budget is growing, and that's the vision of the president, of course. The president has put another $2.5 billion proposed to grow our budget next year that I hope we'll be able to convince the Congress to move forward on. And up to us is to demonstrate, we have 5 program managers now. What are those next 4 programs? We have 5 more coming in the door. What does that portfolio look like? And I'll say unanimously, when I talk to members of Congress, everybody wants for us to be successful, either because they've had cancer in their family or they have an elderly parent at home with dementia. Everybody wants those faster cures and faster solutions, but has a little bit of a different vision of what that should look like. So I need to deliver on that vision across multiple stakeholders, that it's clear, not only that we're bringing those cures faster, but we're also really supporting the rest of the federal ecosystem. If we're catalyzing those investments for NIH to take on and bring forward the most impactful clinical trials, like that's another success.
And are you getting a lot of input from Congress on like, hey, nudge, nudge, wouldn't it be great if you funded these particular advanced projects rather than some other ones that you obviously have your process, and the process is the process, but there's always sort of the political side of this as well.
So this is one of those things that I felt we really had to be uncompromising on at ARPA-H. So when working with the Congress to define our authorities, we can't have a single dollar linked to a specific disease or a technology, because there's trillions of other dollars doing that within the federal government. Like this is the place that we can explore, we can be audacious, and we need to be able to do that with complete freedom from our program managers. So we have that authority. I mean, everybody has their favorite project, but that's definitely something I'm really excited that we're able to go forward with.
So we're talking about capital allocation for ARPA-H from the government. What about within ARPA-H? If we could be in the room where it happens, and let's say in the coming months or year, you have many projects that are coming your way, could you give us some insight into how you think the decision-making process will go within ARPA-H to prioritize certain projects over others? You alluded to this, but just you can be explicit so people listening can know if they are going to be involved in the process. What do you think your decision-making process will be for capital allocation?
Yeah, so internally, we actually leave it up to the program manager to define their budget, and then they have to defend their budget when they pitch the program. And so it's a lean decision-making structure. The program manager pitches their office director. If that's a green light, it comes to me. If that's a green light, I give them their bank account, and then they're off to the races. And so they defend that budget, and I'll give you kind of a concrete example that, let's say you're pitching a program to a new cancer therapy that you want to bring to the clinic. You may pitch a $100 million program where maybe $70 million of that goes to technology development. But we're also creating a really interesting hub and spoke network of bringing together clinical partners so that we can accelerate, enrolling patients for clinical trials, for testing prototypes. The rest of the funds might be pitched to that network, so that we're really not just accelerating the technology, but that ability to translate and get out the door, if that's helpful.
And Andrew asked you a question about metrics for success, and I'd also be curious. So let's say one of these programs goes through and has great success. Comes through, but you need more funding. It kind of graduates.
Yep.
What happens on the other side of the process, and who would you want to reach out to? And again, people that may want to reach out to you to have interest. Now, how do they reach out to you for further funding, maybe private market funding?
So really unique to ARPA-H, we have a translation and office that works with every program manager even before they launch a program. And so Ross, for example, I thought it was going to take him 4 or 5 months. He's never been a DARPA program manager, so his ARPA model was new to him. I thought it was going to take 4 or 5 months to get across the finish line, but he worked with our transition office, who introduced him immediately to VCs in this area and said, help me understand who are the players in this marketplace, who needs to be at the table when I'm launching this program, that they're aware of it, and I need to know what the white space and gaps are, and what do I need to de-risk for private investors to pick this up on the back end. So in 2 months, he launched his program because this was so efficient in letting him know what the white space was. And then, of course, those partners will kind of keep close to ARPA-H as we go forward so they can learn about the progress that we're making. And then hopefully continue to de-risk those investments so somebody can pick it up on the back end. So it's not an afterthought for us. It's really built into the process. We're not just de-risking the technology. We're de-risking the whole capability so that it can be picked up on the other end. And then we invite private investors, we invite philanthropic investors to be a partner with us on the back end. Ross has a phase 3 of his program that he has to go to a clinical trial. Maybe at some point we share that risk with a private investor and we cost share on that. Those are things that we would absolutely consider as we move forward.
And I hate to ask this question, but I will. How do you think about then, you say share risk and then also share reward. So is there an equity model that if there is something successful and is the government own it, or how will that work moving forward if someone wants to pick up the future risk?
We're not going to take any equity. And then some of those conversations around IP are really interesting ones that we want to talk about incentives with the industry, because I know the government doesn't want to take IP, but there's really active conversations right now, as you know, in Washington around margin rights. And what does that mean long term for a small co, for a large company? So we'd love to hear from folks about what works in those models. These are things that we can also experiment with at ARPA-H moving forward.
One of the questions that we were just talking about backstage was the potential for a new headquarters, as it were, for ARPA-H. Can you tell us a little bit about their thinking behind where you want to locate ARPA-H headquarters and what's behind the decision?
So, in working with the Congress on our authorities, when the omnibus was published, I kind of expected about 95% of it. In the 5% that I didn't expect of our authorities was ARPA-H will have 3 geographies, 3 geographic locations, period, no explanation. And so we're like, okay, this is an incredible opportunity, actually. Our customer base is all Americans, and so how do we lean into 3 sites that can represent all Americans? And I can't think of 3 cities or 3 states that represent all of America. So we said, we're going to use this to actually help make sure we can transition programs out of ARPA-H. And so we knew we would need a stakeholder and an operations hub in the Washington, D.C. region. We don't have an address yet, but we're looking for that. And that is stay close to CMS, to FDA, to make sure things can survive. But the other 2 sites were competing. Open competition, and they have 2 focus areas. One is a customer experience hub. So this is where we'll recruit patients for clinical trials. We can scale up manufacturing. We can use this hub and spoke network to also, if we have a prototype to test and we want to enroll patients in their homes, we can use this. This is a way to really reach all Americans. We'll task the hubs where, to help us achieve these tasks, and also recruit spokes. So if a hub, we have a hub in Washington, D.C., we might bring stakeholders in from all over the country to really drive what we're thinking of as the ARPANET, which came out of DARPA. For us, this is the ARPANET for health. We really want to create this nationwide network to amplify ARPA-H's impact. In addition to the customer experience hub, we're having an investor catalyst hub. And so for all the things to help us get across the finish line, not just looking only for financial ROI, but local investors that might be really determined to keep a capability in a community, because that's the community that's going to benefit from it most. So that's really our vision with this hub and spoke network and sites. There will be ARPA-H teams at these locations, but it's really to access this nationwide capability.
Great.
Well, Renee, thank you. And as we come to the end, and thanks so much for taking all of our questions and answering them so clearly, but we have about a minute left. Anything you want to end on, or anything we haven't asked you that you'd love for people to know about with ARPA-H and your vision for the future, just in a minute? Yeah,
you asked me earlier and I didn't answer the question of what are the things that I'm worried about or scared, and I'm just worried that we're not going to rise to this challenge. In the introduction, I was like, this is really a once in a lifetime, once in a generation. The government starting a new agency to take a different approach to health. We've all been asking for this for so long, and with all of you in the room, all the program managers that we have, every day I just wake up and I'm like, I hope we meet this challenge.
Great. Well, thank you very much
Great,
for
thank
doing
you.
it. Thank you
Really
all for listening.
Thanks for joining.